Hey everyone, History Mystery Man here, coming to you today from Geneseo, Illinois, more specifically Oakwood Cemetery. Now, why am I here? That's a pretty good question. I'm sort of scratching my head on that one myself. Anyway, a little high school friend from years ago who now lives in the area, she sent me a book and I read it. And I'm sure you may know about it, The Starved Rock Murders of 1960, this book by Steve Stout. I became so intrigued with the case that I had to come see this place for myself. So I hopped in my car and drove hundreds of miles, and here I am. Now, I have no idea if Chester Weger is innocent or guilty. I don't know enough about the case to make that call. And of course, I wasn't there in Starved Rock State Park when this horrible crime took place on March 14th, 1963. Lovely housewives from Chicago, Riverside, Illinois, were brutally slain. We may never know what happened in that park that day. What I do know is that the area, this general area, Ottawa, Utica, Oglesby, LaSalle, is very much divided on whether he's innocent or guilty. And if there's one thing that stands out, it's certainly that. And I've searched online for more information. And what really struck me more than anything, you can go on different Facebook pages and on social media sites, and you'll find plenty, and I mean a lot, of empathy for Chester Weger. Chester Weger was the man who was convicted of the crime and went to jail in 1961. He spent 60 plus years in prison, the longest imprisoned inmate in Illinois history. And he was just paroled in November of 2019. So he's out now, but he spent a long time, 6 decades, in prison. And there's a lot of empathy online for Chester Weger. What I didn't find online, surprisingly, is empathy for the victims. And that's why I'm here. This video will be dedicated to the memory of, in honor of, Lillian Oding, Mildred Lindquist, and of course, Frances Murphy. Frankie, her friends and family called her. They beautiful women. They went into Starved Rock State Park for a little getaway. They had every right to enjoy their day and come out and go home and tell their friends and neighbors all about it, but they didn't get that opportunity. And I want to make this video about them in their memory. That's why I begin today at Oakwood Cemetery, residing right next to the grave of Frances Murphy. Yep, she's buried here. And I wanted to come pay my respects to her. But this one's for the ladies that lost their lives that day in Starved Rock State Park. So I'm going to go to the state park tomorrow. I'm going to go to the area where the crime happened. I'm going to see it. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to walk in the footsteps of Chester Weger in his hometown and just sort of jump in and get a feel for this thing. A really bizarre case and tragic and so sad, but in memory of those 3 lovely ladies. That's why I'm here. History Mystery Man, on duty and at your service. Welcome to the main drag here in Oglesby, Illinois, Walnut Street. Hometown of Marion Dane Bauer, a children's author, believe it or not, and hometown of Chester Weger. Chester was born in Derby, Iowa in 1939, but the family moved here to Oglesby in 1942. He was the 3rd of 6 siblings. Nice little town. He was a high school dropout and wanted to get away, so he joined the Marine Corps in 1956. That's where he got the nickname Rocky that he got tattooed on his shoulder. That's where that started. But the Marine Corps didn't go so well either. So he was honorably discharged in 1957 and moved back here to Oglesby, where he took on odd jobs and finally a dishwasher position at the Starved Rock Lodge just a few weeks before the murders in 1960. But this would have been growing up as a kid. I know they lived on the outskirts of town, but growing up as a kid, this would have been quite familiar to Chester Weger. His hometown, Oglesby, Illinois. Thank you for joining me, Steve. I appreciate your time.
Okay,
here
good.
Today. And did you grow up in Utica, Illinois? Is this
No,
your
no,
hometown?
I pretend to be from here, but no, I'm from Galesburg, Illinois.
Oh, Galesburg.
Galesburg, yeah, home of Carl Sandburg, and I'm one of the biggest Carl Sandburg fans you ever
Oh, really?
will ever meet.
I love Carl Sandburg.
Oh, well, I'll send you.
Illinois Prairie poet.
I met him twice.
Did you really?
Once I was a baby. I'll send you that picture. It was
I've
in the
been to
newspaper.
his birth home, by the way.
Oh,
there in I'm a fan.
My picture is up in there with Sandburg.
One of the original Illinois Prairie poets, along with Edgar Lee Masters. Have you
Right.
heard of him?
No, sure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But so I'm a huge fan of Sandburg. Really, is interesting to me that my mom took me in to visit to see Sandburg when he was in town at a book signing, and this had to be 52 or 53 because I was in her arms. And she bought a book for him, and he signed it. And there's a picture, and it ran in the newspaper, and said, "Well, here's baby Steve, you know, blah 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 blah." And perhaps Steve will grow up to be an author like Sandburg someday. My mom died with that next to her because she loved that.
Wow.
So in '53, maybe grow up to be an author, which I had no idea.
We know you wrote the book, The Starved Rock Murders, and how long ago did you write it?
Late. It started in the late '70s. I don't remember the exact years. Late '70s, and it came out in the early '80s.
So what compelled you to write this book? Was it something burning inside? Why did you write it?
Well, after I wrote a book about the Cherry Coal Mine disaster of 1909, I decided I wrote a historical novel on that, and that's a really amazing story. I was looking for a next project to do. I was working in the newspapers at the time, and I was in a newspaper meeting, and they were talking, and the boss wasn't there yet, and I was sitting around, and they started talking about a murder that happened someplace else in LaSalle County, and this was like just around 1980 or so, something like that, maybe a little earlier. And they were talking about this murder, and somebody said, "Well, maybe Weger got out," and the whole room laughed, except for me. Who's Weger? Oh, Chester Weger. He's the guy who was convicted of the Starved Rock murder case. Starved Rock what? The Starved Rock murders. I go, what are you talking about? They go, just look it up.
And
40 years later, we're sitting here, and I'm still looking it up. Yeah, so I saw that nobody's written a book. There's newspaper articles, of course, Life magazine articles. Have you seen those?
Is there another book on the Starved Rock Murders? Is your book the
No,
only
but
one?
there's short stories about the murder.
Okay, but not a book.
Not that I've ever. Well, I could say no pretty easily. I mean, I would think that somebody would bring it to my attention after all these years. And you can prove almost any point if you leave out other points that don't satisfy your theories. I don't deal in theories. I don't deal in rumors. I deal in facts. Here's something else I'm very proud of. After 40 years of the book being out, nobody has come up with a factual error in the book yet. Nobody. There are probably typos in it. You know, the way I spell, I wouldn't be surprised. But the point of it is, nobody can say, well, you got this wrong, Steve. And state police, well, they've read the book. County police, well, they read the book. Everybody who was alive when the book came out, Hess, Dummett, Mr. Warren, Chester. About a week after the book first came out, I'm very proud of it. You know, I'm just like...
Have book sales been good? I mean, healthy over the years?
Yes.
Do you have any idea how many you've sold?
No, which is kind of good and not good, is because if I did, it's probably just be showing off.
Yeah.
And or saying, what did I do with all that cash? Well, I haven't made much money on the book. It's a little book. It's independent publisher. It's not nationally marketed and stuff. You can order it online, and it was on Amazon. I think it might still be on Amazon, and you could buy one of the first copies for $400 on eBay. You could probably buy one of my copies.
What's your story?
Book came out. Have the copies, and I said, here's what I'm going to do. I put 6 books together and mailed them to Chester Weger with return postage. I said, well, here it is. Read it, let me know, if you have no objections, sign 5 copies, send them back to me, keep one. And he did. I have copies of the Starbrook murder signed by Chester Weger. I have no guarantees that he's read the book, but he had access to the book in his prison cell for decades. So my guess, he's read the book. My guess, if he had objections to the book, would he put his name on my book like he put the confessions? And so if Chester and Mr. Hale have any objections about my book, none of it, neither Weger nor him, has yet to point out any factual errors. And if you read my book and said, well, I kind of believe that Chester did it, well, do you believe it beyond a shadow of a doubt? If you do, you have to explain the airplane to me.
A hair was discovered on one of the gloves of one of the victims. It was DNA tested. It came back. It was not Chester's. Your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that, yes. Chester Weger is convicted of killing one person, Mrs. Oding. He's convicted of only one of the murders, right? Mm-hmm. The hair was found on Mrs. Murphy's glove. Mrs. Murphy is an open case. Mrs. Murphy is an uncharged case. I say it's not unsolved. It's solved, but it's not charged. So it's an open case. It's an open murder case. So if Mr. Hale wants to use that hair to say Chester Weger didn't kill Mrs. Murphy, that's fine. Let him go ahead. But none of that's in Mrs. Oding's trial. I was there at his news conference after the hearing. He said it's a long shot that this will do anything for the case. He said, well, a few weeks ago he said, this solves the case. This is the key. You know what I do when people ask me that in my lectures? I said, okay, I wonder what kind of rubber gloves and protective equipment they used when they went to the canyon scene that day. Well, probably was tough to work in those rubber gloves back then. What do you eat? And everybody looks at me like, well, Steve, you're just being silly, because they did not use rubber gloves in 1960 to investigate crimes. They did not seal off. We're crime tape? You think they had crime tape back in the 60s? Okay, here's the point about the hair. 3 dead bodies. The conservation boys, the kind of like, they weren't really juvenile delinquents, but they were like in trouble, and they came in and with their supervisor, they found the bodies. You find 3 bodies in the canyon laying there, middle of winter. What do? You see if anybody's alive, right? Before you even call the cops, there's no cell phones in the canyon. The nearest phone is 2 or 3 miles away by foot. What do? You lean over those bodies and you look at each one to make sure they're not alive. Like you're not going to walk away from a person laying there, right? I would do it. You would do it. Anybody would do it. That guy did it. And then you would call in detectives. So the first detectives on the scene do what? They look at the bodies. They lean over the bodies. Then you call the state police in. What do? They look at the bodies. They lean over the bodies. All this work with the bodies had to be done without gloves, without protective equipment, and without any regard to DNA or hairs or anything like that. Then you need to carry 3 bodies out of the canyon. But back then, it was a walk. It's an easy walk now. Back then, the trail from the parking lot down there, where it still is today, you just go up and down the bluffs like this. And it would kill you to go back there, because you'd be huffing and puffing. I don't care how old you were. Okay, change that scenario to carrying 3 bodies out of the canyon. So they literally just took people off the street. They needed help. They didn't have enough cops, enough state cops, enough park workers to do that. So they just brought, hey, we need some help down here. It just had people, good people, to help carry the bodies out of the canyon.
I did read in another recent published article that a judge approved DNA testing 8 or 9 hair and or fiber samples. Are we waiting on, and supposedly to come out in 2022, we're running out of 2022, are we anticipating more evidence DNA wise to come out?
They said the testing is still, testing of certain evidence is still going on.
Okay.
But that evidence is set up in the courtroom since 19 1961, in the courthouse, not courtroom, courthouse attic, since probably 1961, 62. How many people went up to that evidence and went through it? I had permission from state's attorney. I spent 2 days, 4 hours each in that hot attic going through evidence. I touched everything in this case. Everything that was in the county's possession. His jacket, that slide that had the hair on it, all of the evidence that was up there, all the paperwork that was up there, I was up with it for 4 hours. My DNA is on that evidence. They used to allow secretaries up in that room. Get a new job there. Hey, you want to come up and see during? I'd like to go up and see the Star Rock murder guy. We got Weger's jacket up there. Reporters, students, law students, forensic scientists, all had access to that material.
So you yourself don't anticipate a bombshell coming?
No.
In regards to the case that exonerate Chester Weger?
No. Do you?
I don't know enough about it to answer that.
Yeah. The bombshell would be a video recording of the murders. That'd be a bombshell because they know video back in 1960. But the point of it is, what bombshells could come 60 years later?
I don't know.
Everybody is dead in this case. Everybody.
Are you still at this point 100% certain that Chester Weger committed these crimes?
Chester Weger confessed not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, not 6 times, 7 times he confessed to different people at different times. Then he went on a reenactment in the canyon in front of a dozen or 2 dozens newspaper reporter, photographers, TV people, radio broadcasters, everything. He had every opportunity while he was being shackled, showing the media, showing the officials, police officials, how he committed the murders. He showed them how he committed the murders. And all he had to do was turn to these 10, 20, 15 people, say, they're making me do this. They're telling me what to say. I'm being railroaded. Look at me, I'm beat up from last night when I confessed. Look at me. He didn't do that. And do you think the reporters would have paid attention? They would have loved that. Suspect denies murder at scene of the crime. You're an attorney who feels an injustice was made. You're an attorney knows that DNA didn't exist in 1960. Let's go back and run it through some laboratory tests. I'm for it. Let's do it and stuff. What does Mr. Weger confess to touching? He confesses touching the binoculars. He confesses touching the camera. He confesses touching the murder weapon, right? He confessed to all that. What's DNA? Is that DNA tested? Why isn't that being tested?
What's the answer?
That's a question for him, isn't it? Because it has Weger's DNA on it is my guess. That's not my answer. That's just a guess. I stand in this case with the judge, the jury, the appellate court, the Illinois Supreme Court, and most of all, I stand with the families. Imagine the pain this investigation is causing the families. 60 years ago, their loved ones were killed in a canyon. It's solved.
The hike it takes to get here. I mean, I'm in good shape. I mean, I walk 3-4 miles every day, and sometimes more. But I'm sweating. And as I get down into the canyon area, I can't believe those ladies in the dead of winter, a very, very cold March, skirts made their way down into this canyon. That had to have been quite a hike, and they were, I don't guess there were a lot of people in the park that day. Middle of the winter, middle of March. I can only believe they must have been remarkable women.